Have you ever, in perfect silence, heard a whisper of your name? Or caught a flicker of movement in an empty room out of the corner of your eye? That isn't your imagination. It's an echo. The echo of a long-forgotten story, trying to be remembered. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles, the place where we listen to the stories that never truly died. The station in Belgrade was a grand, crumbling beast of concrete and time-stained marble, a relic of an era that felt both more optimistic and more brutal than the present. I hefted my backpack, the straps digging a familiar, comforting weight into my shoulders. It was 10 p.m. and the air was thick with the late summer heat, mingled with the smells of diesel, fried dough, and the faint metallic tang of the tracks themselves. My ticket was a flimsy piece of paper clutched in my hand, the Cyrillic script a beautiful, incomprehensible scrawl next to the stark, blocky letters spelling out my destination. Bar, Montenegro. The night train. The very idea had a romance to it. A promise of adventure I'd been chasing since I'd landed in Europe 6 weeks ago. This was the final leg of my journey. A long, slow ride through the Dinaric Alps, a landscape I'd only seen in dramatic, oversaturated photos online. The train itself, when it finally shuddered into the station, did little to dampen my enthusiasm. It was old, painted a deep, faded blue with a stripe of gray, the carriages showing their age in a spiderweb of rust and grime. It looked authentic. It looked real. I found my carriage, number 342, and hauled myself and my oversized pack up the steep metal steps. The corridor inside was narrow, lined with a worn, reddish carpet and illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, constant buzz. My compartment was a 6-bunk couchette, blessedly empty for the moment. I'd paid the extra €10 for a bottom bunk, a small luxury that felt like a major win. The space was compact, smelling of stale air and disinfectant. A small, fold-down table sat beneath a window that was smudged with the ghostly prints of previous passengers. I slid my backpack under the bottom bunk and sat down on the coarse, scratchy blanket, the springs groaning in protest. This was it, the real deal. Not some high-speed, sterile vessel shuttling tourists between capitals, but a proper, working train, a lifeline rumbling through the bones of the Balkans. I pulled out my phone to text my mom, letting her know I was on board. The signal was already weak. On the train to Montenegro, I typed, "Looks like it's straight out of a Cold War movie. Awesome. Talk to you tomorrow." The message hovered with a spinning wheel for a moment before a failed to send notification popped up. Of course, I wasn't surprised. I stowed the phone and leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the platform. The last few passengers were straggling aboard. A group of loud, cheerful students with guitars and crates of beer. A family herding 2 small, sleepy children. A man in a suit talking urgently into his phone. Then, just as a whistle blew somewhere down the platform, a single figure appeared at the door to my carriage. It was an old woman, moving with a slow, deliberate shuffle. She was dressed entirely in dark, heavy-looking clothes despite the warm night. A long black skirt, a gray woolen cardigan buttoned up to her throat, and a dark scarf covering most of her hair. She paused at the entrance to my compartment, her eyes, shadowed by a web of deep wrinkles, glancing at the bunk numbers before settling on the one opposite mine. She carried no luggage, only a small, worn leather purse that she clutched in both hands. Without a word, she entered and sat down, placing the purse carefully on her lap. She didn't look at me. She just sat, her back ramrod straight, and stared at the fold-down table between us. "Hello," I said, offering a small, friendly smile. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in my direction, but her eyes remained fixed on the table. A moment of awkward silence passed. Maybe she didn't speak English. I settled back against my seat as the train gave a violent lurch, followed by the screech of metal on metal. We were moving. The lights of the station began to slide past the window, casting rhythmic, strobing patterns across the old woman's blank face. Her stillness was unsettling. It wasn't the calm stillness of a seasoned traveler, but a rigid, absolute quiet, as if she were a statue placed on the seat. I tried to busy myself, pulling out a dog-eared paperback and my water bottle. The city lights of Belgrade quickly gave way to the scattered lights of suburbs, and then, finally, to a profound, inky blackness. The only illumination came from our own carriage, a sterile yellow glow reflected back at us from the window. In that reflection, I could see myself, a pale, tired-looking kid with messy hair, and across from me, the woman. In the glass, it looked like she was staring right at me. I glanced up from my book, but in the real world, she was still staring at the table, her hands perfectly still on her purse. I told myself it was just the angle of the reflection, a trick of the light. The train picked up speed, the clatter of the wheels on the rails settling into a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Tee-tunk, 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 tee-tunk. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. The woman's silence was strangely loud, filling the small space. After about an hour, the conductor came by. He was a large man with a thick gray mustache and a weary expression, his blue uniform looking as tired as he did. He grunted a greeting, took my ticket, and punched it with a satisfying chunk. Then he looked at the woman. He didn't ask for her ticket. He just looked at her, and his already sour expression seemed to tighten. He stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. She did not acknowledge him in any way. Finally, with another grunt, he turned and left, sliding the compartment door shut behind him. That was strange. Why didn't he check her ticket? Maybe she had a pass, or maybe he knew her. It was a local train, after all. Still, his reaction, a flicker of something that looked like annoyance, or maybe even fear, stuck with me. The first tunnel arrived without warning. One moment we were rattling through a dark, empty landscape. The next we were plunged into a roaring, suffocating blackness that swallowed the train whole. The sound changed instantly from a rhythmic clatter to a deafening, echoing roar that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. The lights in the carriage flickered violently, then held steady. It was claustrophobic and disorienting. I glanced up, and my heart gave a little jump. The old woman was looking at me, not at my reflection, but directly at me. Her eyes were dark pools in her wrinkled face, and her expression was completely empty. There was no malice in it, but no warmth either. It was just a blank, unnerving stare. I held her gaze for a second, my throat suddenly dry, before I forced myself to look away, down at my book. My skin prickled. The roaring in the tunnel was immense. I counted the seconds, waiting for the release. After what felt like an eternity, we burst back out into the open night, the sudden silence just as jarring as the noise had been. I risked a glance up. The woman was back in her original position, staring at the table, as if she had never moved at all. I must have imagined it. The flickering lights, the disorienting darkness, my own fatigue. It was easy to get spooked. I took a long drink of water and tried to focus on the comforting, mundane reality of the train. The gentle rocking, the hum of the lights, the worn texture of the seat beneath me. Everything was normal. But then came the second tunnel, and the third, and the fourth. The Belgrade Bar line, I was beginning to realize, was less a train track and more a series of holes punched through mountains. Each time, the world dissolved into a roaring vortex of sound and darkness. And each time, I would feel the weight of her stare. I stopped looking up, but I could feel it, a palpable pressure on my skin. I kept my eyes glued to my book, pretending to read the same sentence over and over again. My initial excitement about the journey was beginning to curdle into a low-grade anxiety. Sometime after midnight, I decided to try to get some sleep. The other bunks in the couchette remained empty, for which I was now profoundly grateful. I didn't want anyone else in this small, tense space. I pulled off my hiking boots, arranged my small day pack as a pillow, and lay down on the bunk, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. I faced the wall, turning my back to the woman. Sleep, however, wouldn't come. The rhythmic clatter of the train was a constant reminder of our movement through the deep, Serbian night. And with my eyes closed, my other senses felt heightened. I became aware of a new sound. It was very faint at first, barely audible over the noise of the train. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 It seemed to be coming from the bunk directly above mine. The empty bunk. I opened my eyes, listening. The sound was steady, precise. It wasn't the random creak or rattle of an old train car. It had a deliberate quality. Tap, tap, tap. I reasoned with myself. It had to be a loose panel, a wire, something vibrating against the wall in time with the train's movement. That was the only logical explanation. Then we entered another tunnel. The roar enveloped us, and the tapping stopped. The sudden, complete absence of the sound was more unnerving than the sound itself. I lay there in the roaring dark, every muscle tensed, waiting. I could feel her eyes on my back. I was sure of it. When we shot out of the tunnel, back into the relative quiet of the open air, the tapping started again. Tap, 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 from the empty bunk above me. And it only happened when we weren't in a tunnel. My tired, rational mind scrambled for an explanation. Air pressure changes. The tunnels were causing some kind of shift in the carriage's frame, silencing the vibration, which then resumed outside. It was plausible. It had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out, focusing on the simple goal of falling asleep. Hours seemed to pass. I drifted in a state of semi-consciousness, too anxious to fall fully asleep. The train continued its journey, plunging in and out of tunnels, the pattern repeating itself over and over. The roar of darkness, the silence from the bunk above, the feeling of being watched. Then the relative quiet of the open track and the return of the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. At some point, the train began to slow down. Not for a station, but a gradual, grinding deceleration in what felt like the middle of nowhere. The rhythmic clatter dissolved into a series of groans and squeals from the brakes, until, with a final shudder, we stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The humming of the lights and the gentle rocking of the carriage were gone. There was no sound of a station, no platform lights, just the impenetrable blackness of the Montenegrin wilderness outside the window. The tapping from the bunk above had stopped. I lay perfectly still for a minute, my ears straining in the dead quiet. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Slowly, carefully, I rolled over. The emergency lights in the corridor had kicked on, casting a dim, sickly green glow into our compartment. The old woman was no longer looking at the table. She was sitting bolt upright, her head tilted, and she was staring intently at the empty bunk above me. Her hands were still on her purse, but her knuckles were white. Her expression wasn't blank anymore. It looked like she was listening, waiting for something. My own breath caught in my chest. I followed her gaze to the ceiling of my bunk, just inches from my face. There was nothing there but a stained, beige panel. I listened. Nothing. The silence from the rest of the train was just as profound. No voices, no movement from the corridor. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What's going on?" I whispered, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet compartment. "Why have we stopped?" The old woman didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her focus remained entirely on the empty space above my head. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. The air in the compartment felt suddenly, distinctly colder. A chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. It was a deep, damp cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the train. I could see my own breath misting in the green emergency light. I looked at the window. It was completely black, a perfect void. But I leaned closer, trying to see anything. A tree, a star, a hint of the landscape. My own reflection stared back, a wide-eyed, ghostly image of myself. Behind me in the reflection, the woman was a dark, unmoving shape. I pressed my face closer to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the light from the compartment. For a moment, there was just darkness. And then I saw it, or I thought I saw it. It was gone in a flash, a trick of the mind, but the image was burned into my retinas. Out in the blackness, standing just beyond the gravel bed of the tracks, was a face. It was pale, unnaturally so, with large, dark eyes. It wasn't looking at the train, it was looking directly at my window. Directly at me. It was there for a heartbeat, a pale oval floating in the void, and then it was gone. I recoiled from the window, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. A birch tree. It had to be a piece of white birch bark catching the faint light from the train. Or an animal. A deer, maybe. My mind was playing tricks on me. I was tired, I was on edge. That's all it was. It had to be. The compartment door slid open with a rattling crash, and I nearly screamed. It was the conductor, Milos. He held a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp, dusty cone through the dim green light. His face was slick with sweat, and his eyes were wide, darting around the compartment before they landed on me. He completely ignored the old woman, as if she were a piece of furniture. "Stay in compartment," he said, his voice a low, urgent growl. His English was heavily accented, each word a piece of gravel. "Problem with track. Signal problem. We fix soon. Do not leave compartment." "What kind of problem?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What was that out there?" "I saw. Is nothing?" He cut me off, his gaze hard. He shone his flashlight beam past me, out the window into the darkness, sweeping it back and forth. The beam revealed nothing but a dense wall of pine trees and thick undergrowth. "Nothing. You see reflection. Stay here. Lock door." He didn't wait for a reply. He backed out of the compartment, his eyes still scanning the corridor, and slid the door shut. I heard the click of an external lock. He had locked us in. My fear, which had been a slow creeping vine, now tightened its grip around my chest. Why would he lock the door? I turned back to the old woman. The conductor's visit had not broken her strange trance. She was still staring at the bunk above me, her body rigid, her breathing shallow. The cold in the room was getting worse. I could feel it seeping into my clothes, a deep, penetrating chill. I looked at the window again. Condensation was now forming on the inside of the glass, blooming out from the edges in intricate, feathery patterns, like frost. I reached out a hesitant finger and touched it. The glass was icy cold, so cold it was painful. This wasn't normal. It was a warm night. The silence stretched on. I sat on my bunk, opposite the woman, watching her watch the empty space above my head. The green light of the emergency system cast everything in a sickly, underwater hue. The train was a dead thing, a metal coffin stranded in an ocean of darkness. I thought about my phone, about calling for help, but who would I call, and what would I say? That my train had stopped and an old woman was acting strange? They would think I was crazy. Then, a new sound began. It was not the tapping. It was a low, guttural humming. It was coming from the old woman. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were still fixed on the bunk, but a quiet, tuneless melody was issuing from her throat. It was a discordant, mournful sound, a simple, repeating phrase of 3 or 4 notes that seemed to have no beginning and no end. It was the sound of profound grief, or perhaps something much, much stranger. The humming grew subtly louder, vibrating in the cold air. And as it did, I heard another sound, coming from outside the train. It was a faint, scratching noise, like branches scraping against the metal side of the carriage. But there was no wind. The trees outside were perfectly still. The scratching moved along the side of the train, getting closer to our window. Scratch, scrape, scratch. The woman's humming continued, a chilling counterpoint to the noise outside. I couldn't move. I was frozen to my seat, my eyes darting between the woman and the frosted window. The scratching stopped directly outside. The silence that followed was somehow worse. The woman stopped humming. She slowly, mechanically, lowered her head, and her gaze moved from the empty bunk to me. Her eyes were no longer blank. They were filled with an expression of immense, bottomless pity, as if she were looking at someone already dead. A sharp, violent bang erupted from directly above my head. It wasn't a tap. It was a loud, solid thud, as if a heavy suitcase had been dropped from a great height onto the bunk above me. I yelled out, scrambling backwards off my bunk and pressing myself into the far corner of the compartment, as far away from that sound as I could get. The old woman didn't flinch. She just watched me, her pitiful expression unchanged. Another bang, louder this time, from the same spot. It sounded like something was in there, in the empty bunk. Something heavy, and it was moving. A slow, dragging, scraping sound replaced the banging. The sound of dead weight being pulled across a surface. It scraped its way across the ceiling of my bunk, from the wall towards the corridor. My mind was screaming. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking too much to get a good grip. It didn't matter. The conductor had locked it from the outside. I was trapped in here, trapped with her, and with whatever was in the bunk above me. The scraping stopped. I looked at the old woman. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. And then the power in the train came back on. The main lights flickered to life with a loud hum, washing out the green emergency glow. The ventilation system kicked in, and with a sudden, violent lurch that threw me against the wall, the train started to move. The familiar, rhythmic clatter of the wheels returned, loud and reassuringly normal. The compartment was suddenly just a compartment again. The intense cold dissipated, replaced by the normal, stuffy air. The frost on the window vanished as if it had never been there. The sound from the bunk above was gone. Everything was normal, except for me, panting in the corner like a cornered animal, and the old woman, who now looked away from me and back towards the table, her hands resting on her purse, assuming the same stony stillness as when she first boarded. It was as if the last half hour had never happened. But it did happen. I knew it did. My heart was still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I stayed crouched in the corner watching her. For a long time, the train rattled on, plunging into tunnels and bursting out again. I didn't feel her eyes on me in the darkness anymore. There was no tapping. There was just the steady, monotonous sound of the train on the tracks. Eventually, my fear subsided into a state of exhausted, hypervigilant dread. I didn't dare try to sleep. I just sat watching, waiting for the sun to rise. I thought about the conductor, Milos. His fear had been real. "Do not leave compartment," he'd said. Not "please stay inside," but a command, a warning. What did he know about this stretch of track? What had he seen on other nights? And the face in the window, the pale, floating face, was it connected to the thing in the bunk? Was it trying to get in? The first hint of dawn was a pale, gray light that slowly crept over the horizon, revealing the stark, breathtaking beauty of the Montenegrin mountains. Peaks of dark, jagged rock jutted up into the sky, their slopes covered in a thick blanket of pine forest. We were crossing a high viaduct, a river a silver ribbon far, far below us. In the daylight, my fear felt irrational, almost foolish. It was easy to believe it had all been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the strange atmosphere of the old train. I looked at the woman. She was still sitting in the same position, unmoving. She hadn't slept. I wasn't even sure if she had blinked. As the sunlight grew stronger, filling our compartment, she finally moved. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, dark rosary. Her fingers began to move over the beads, her lips moving in a silent, constant prayer. The train slowed as we approached a small, tidy-looking station. A sign in Cyrillic and Latin script read Colossen. This was a major stop, a small mountain town. The train hissed to a stop, and the doors opened. I felt a wave of relief. People, civilization, normalcy. 2 new passengers entered our compartment. They were a young couple, probably around my age. The man was tall with a friendly, open face and a backpack that looked even bigger than mine. The woman was smaller, with bright, curious eyes and a colorful scarf tied around her neck. They were speaking cheerful, animated German to each other. "Hello," the man said to me in heavily accented English, smiling. "Is this bunk free?" He pointed to the middle bunk on my side. "Yes, all of them are," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just us." I gestured vaguely towards myself and the old woman. The couple, who introduced themselves as Stefan and Anya, began to stow their gear, their cheerful chatter filling the space. They seemed to bring the warmth of the outside world in with them. They offered me a piece of chocolate, which I gratefully accepted. They tried to engage the old woman, Anya offering her a warm smile and a Guten Morgen. But she remained unresponsive, her eyes closed, her fingers working the rosary beads. Anya and Stefan exchanged a look, a small shrug, and then turned their attention back to the window, marveling at the scenery. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to grab Stefan by the arm and say, "Don't stay in here. Something is wrong with this train." Something was in the bunk above me. But how could I? I sounded insane even to myself in the bright light of morning. They would think I was a lunatic. So I stayed quiet, chewing on the dry chocolate, a silent participant in the new, normal atmosphere of the compartment. The train pulled out of Collison and continued its journey south. With Stefan and Anya there, the compartment felt safer, less charged. Their presence was a buffer. And yet I couldn't relax. My eyes kept drifting to the bunk above me, then to the old woman. She continued her silent prayer, a sentinel of gloom in the corner. An hour or so later, as we were passing through another, shorter tunnel, Anya, who was sitting by the window, suddenly gasped. "Stefan, did you see that?" she said in German, her voice sharp. "See what?" he asked, looking up from his map. "Out there, in the tunnel. I thought I saw someone walking," she said, her brow furrowed. "Right beside the train." Stefan laughed. "Walking in a tunnel?" Anya, "No. It was probably a reflection or one of the signal lights." "No, it wasn't a light," she insisted, though her voice had lost its conviction. "It looked like a person, just for a second. It was pale. My blood ran cold. I sat bolt upright, staring at her. She caught my eye and gave a nervous little laugh. "It's silly, I know. My eyes are playing tricks on me." But I knew what she had seen. I had seen it too. It was still out there, and it was moving with us. Stefan scoffed, a gentle, condescending sound. "Anya, Liebling, your imagination is running wild. The tunnels are full of maintenance lights, cables, strange shadows. It's a 100-year-old railway. It's bound to be spooky." He patted her knee, a gesture meant to be comforting but which seemed to irritate her. Anya pulled away slightly, her gaze still fixed on the black rectangle of the tunnel mouth we were now leaving behind. "It didn't look like a shadow, Stefan. It was shaped like a man." She turned from the window and saw me staring at her, my expression apparently giving something away. Her own expression shifted from rattled to curious. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it came out as a strangled croak. "No, just didn't sleep well. The train is louder than I expected." It was a weak lie, and I think she knew it. Stefan, however, accepted it readily. "Tell me about it," he boomed, stretching his long legs out into the small space. "But what a view, eh? Worth a bit of lost sleep." He gestured out the window, where the world had opened up into a staggering canyon. The train was clinging to a shelf of rock carved out of a near-vertical cliff face. Far below, a turquoise river snaked its way through the valley floor. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. The sheer scale of it made the train feel like a tiny, fragile toy. I excused myself, needing to get out of the compartment. The air, despite the new arrivals, still felt thick with last night's fear. "I'm just going to stretch my legs," I mumbled, squeezing past Stefan's knees and sliding the door open. The corridor was as narrow and worn as I remembered. I made my way forward, lurching with the sway of the train, steadying myself against the windows. Most of the other compartment doors were closed. From behind one, I could hear the muffled sound of a baby crying. From another, loud snoring. Normal life, happening just feet away from the cold dread I felt sealed inside me. A few doors were open, revealing passengers sleeping in contorted positions, their mouths agape, oblivious. I was looking for Milos, the conductor. I didn't know what I was going to ask him, but I had to see his face again, away from the green-tinged panic of the night. I found him at the front of the carriage, standing in the connecting vestibule between cars. The space was loud, the roaring of the wind and the grinding of the metal couplings filling the air. He was smoking a cigarette, staring out the open window of the vestibule door, the smoke instantly whipped away by the wind. He saw my approach in the reflection on the glass and turned, his face already set in a grim, unwelcoming mask. "Problem?" he asked, his voice flat over the noise. "No, no problem," I said, raising my voice to be heard. I wanted to ask about the stop last night." His eyes narrowed. "Signal problem. I told you." "I know, but you locked the door. From the outside." Milos took a long drag from his cigarette, his eyes fixed on mine. He seemed to be weighing something. "Is for safety. Sometimes people try to get off train when it stops on tracks. Very dangerous. We lock doors." It was a plausible explanation. A corporate policy, perhaps, but it didn't explain the fear in his eyes last night. It didn't explain the cold, or the face, or the sound from the bunk. "I saw something out the window," I pushed, feeling reckless. "When we were stopped. And again just a little while ago in a tunnel. A woman in my compartment saw it too." He flicked his cigarette but out the window, a tiny orange spark disappearing into the vast canyon. He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. The wind howled through the vestibule. "You are American?" he asked finally. "Yes." "You are not used to these mountains," he said. It wasn't a question. The mind plays tricks in the dark. You see rocks, you think they are men. You see moonlight on a tree, you think it is a face. There is nothing on the tracks. Nothing that is alive. The finality with which he said that last sentence sent a fresh chill down my spine. Nothing that is alive. It wasn't a reassurance. It felt like a carefully worded confirmation of something much worse. He turned his back to me then, a clear dismissal, and stared back out the open window, his shoulders hunched against the wind. The conversation was over. I returned to my compartment, my sense of dread renewed and sharpened. Milos knew. He knew something was out there, and his job was to keep the train moving and the passengers ignorant. We weren't being protected, we were being managed. When I slid the door open, the scene inside had changed. Stefan had his laptop out on the small fold-down table and was showing Anya pictures from their trip. The screen cast a modern blue-white light on their faces. The old woman was in her corner, still clutching her rosary, her eyes now open a crack, staring blankly at the floor. "Feeling better?" Anya asked, looking up at me. Her smile was genuine, but her eyes were searching. "A bit." The conductor said the stop was for a signal problem. I relayed his flimsy explanation, watching her reaction. She nodded, but the furrow in her brow told me she didn't fully believe it either. "Makes sense," Stefan said, not looking up from his screen. "The infrastructure in this part of the world isn't exactly state-of-the-art. Look at this, Anya." He pointed to the screen. "This is the Mala Rijeka viaduct. We should be crossing it soon. Highest railway bridge in Europe." He had a digital map up, tracing our route. I leaned over slightly to look. The map showed the train line as a thin red thread weaving through a dense topography of green and brown. Dozens of black stripes crossed the red line. "What are all the black marks?" I asked. "Tunnels," Stefan said cheerfully. "This line has 254 of them, and 435 bridges. An engineering marvel, they called it when Tito opened it in '76. Built by youth work brigades. A lot of people died building it. The conditions were brutal. 254 tunnels. My stomach tightened. We had a long way to go until Bar. Anya, I noticed, was no longer looking at the screen. She was looking at the old woman. "Excuse me," Anya said softly, leaning forward. She spoke in careful, slow German, but the old woman gave no response. Anya switched to English. "Are you okay?" The woman's eyes slowly lifted from the floor to Anya's face. She didn't speak. She simply raised her right hand, the one not holding the rosary, and pointed a single bony finger. She wasn't pointing at Anya. She was pointing at the bunk above my head. The same bunk she'd been staring at last night. Stefan finally looked up from his laptop. "What's she doing?" "I don't know," Anya whispered, her face pale. The woman held her finger there, trembling slightly, pointed at the empty space. Her gaze was intense, focused. Then her lips parted, and she spoke for the first time. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, a sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was only one word, spoken in her own language, a language I didn't understand. Praisen. She said it again, a little stronger this time, her eyes pleading with Anya. Praisen. Then she lowered her hand, her eyes closed, and she retreated back into her silent, stony vigil. What did she say? I asked, looking between the two of them. I have no idea, Stefan said, looking thoroughly unnerved for the first time. He pulled out his phone. Google Translate, my friend. He typed the word in phonetically. He held up the phone so we could all see the result. The Serbian word, praisen, translated to a single English word, empty. We all stared at the phone, then at the bunk. The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. She wasn't just stating a fact. It was a warning, or an incantation. Keep it empty. It must remain empty. Stefan cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Well, she's eccentric. He tried to sound dismissive, but his voice was strained. He shut his laptop and stuffed it back into his bag with unnecessary force. The cheerful, touristy atmosphere was gone, replaced by the same tense silence I had endured all night. Stefan kept glancing at the bunk, then at the old woman, a frown etched on his face. Anya was practically pressed against the window, as far from the center of the compartment as she could get. The train rattled on. Outside, the scenery was still breathtaking, but none of us were looking at it anymore. We were all acutely aware of the geography of our small compartment. The space felt like it was shrinking, the ceiling pressing down. Every creak of the train, every rattle of the window, sounded like a prelude to something else. Then we entered the next tunnel. It was a long one. The roar was immediate and total. The lights flickered, casting strobe-like images of Anya's wide eyes and Stefan's tense jaw. I instinctively looked at the old woman. She wasn't looking at me this time. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her knuckles white on her rosary, her lips moving in a frantic, silent prayer. She looked terrified, and then I heard it. Over the roar of the tunnel, a new sound. It was the soft, rhythmic tapping. Not from the bunk above me this time. It was coming from the window. Tap, 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 as if someone were patiently knocking on the glass from the outside. In the middle of a tunnel, miles from anywhere, with the train moving at 50 miles an hour. Anya heard it too. Her head whipped around, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror, and she stared at the glass. Stefan heard it. He was frozen, his mouth slightly open, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It was quiet, but clear, methodical. Polite, deliberate knocking. My gaze was drawn to the window, to my own faint reflection. Behind my reflection, in the deep black of the tunnel, I could see Anya's face, pale and horrified. And just over her shoulder, reflected in the glass, was another face, pale, with large, dark eyes. It was right there, looking in. Stefan let out a choked, guttural sound. He saw it too. It was there for only a second, a ghostly afterimage superimposed over Anya's terror, and then the train burst out of the tunnel into the blinding sunlight. The face was gone. The tapping was gone. There was only the bright blue sky and the rugged green slopes of the mountains. Anya screamed. It wasn't a loud shriek, but a thin, gasping cry of pure horror. She scrambled away from the window, stumbling into Stefan's lap. She was trembling uncontrollably, her face ashen. I saw it. Stefan, you saw it, right? You saw it! She sobbed, burying her face in his shoulder. Stefan was white as a sheet, his easygoing demeanor completely shattered. He held Anya tightly, his own eyes wide and fixed on the window, as if expecting the face to reappear. I don't know what I saw, he stammered. It was a light, a trick of the light. But his voice carried zero conviction. He was trying to convince himself, not us. I looked at the old woman. She had stopped her frantic praying. Her eyes were open again, and she was watching Stefan and Anya. Her expression was the same one she had given me last night, one of profound, heartbreaking pity. It was the look of someone watching a tragedy they were powerless to prevent. "We have to get off this train," Anya said, her voice muffled by Stefan's shirt. "At the next station. I don't care where it is. We have to get off." "Okay," Stefan said, his voice low and shaky. "Okay, yes, we'll get off." He looked at me, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "You saw it too, didn't you? In the window." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Vindicating them meant admitting to myself that what I was experiencing was real, not just a product of my exhausted mind. The flimsy wall of rationalization I had built around myself was crumbling. A birch tree, a reflection, a maintenance light, they were all lies. There was something out there, and it was pacing us. It was looking in. Stefan pulled out his phone again, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the map. "The next stop is Podgorica, the capital. It's a big city. We can get a bus from there. Or a taxi. Anything." He calculated the time. Maybe an hour and a half. An hour and a half felt like a lifetime. We had to pass through more tunnels to get there. The map on his phone showed at least a dozen more of the black stripes crossing our path. Each one was now a symbol of imminent terror. The four of us sat in a strained, suffocating silence. Stefan and Anya were huddled together, whispering occasionally in German. I was pressed into my corner, my leg muscles aching from being so tense. The old woman remained in her spot, a silent, grim statue. The only sounds were the rattle of the train and the frantic beating of my own heart. I couldn't stop replaying the image of the face in the window. It wasn't monstrous in the traditional sense. It had no fangs, no claws, no grotesque features. That's what made it so much worse. It was its placid emptiness, its human-like form in a place where no human could possibly be. It was the calm, patient curiosity in its dark eyes that was so deeply unsettling. It wasn't trying to break in. It was just watching, waiting. The train began to slow again. My immediate reaction was a jolt of panic. Not another unscheduled stop. But then I saw the signs of a station ahead. Buildings, roads, a proper platform. A sign read Nixik. It wasn't Podgorica, but it was a town. It was a chance. "Let's get off here," Anya said urgently, grabbing her backpack. "Stefan, now?" "No, wait," Stefan said, checking his map again. "This is a branch line. The train just stops for a minute. If we get off here, we're stuck. Podgorica is the main hub. It's better to wait." "I don't care. I'm not spending another minute in a tunnel on this train," she insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. The train hissed to a halt at the platform. A few people got off, a few got on in other carriages. Our door remained closed. Milos, the conductor, was standing on the platform, watching the passengers. His eyes scanned the length of the train, and for a moment, they met mine through the window. His expression was grim, impatient. He wanted to get moving again. "Anya, we have to be smart about this," Stefan urged, keeping a hand on her arm. "We'll be safer in a big city. We'll be in Podgorica before we know it." Just as he said that, the old woman spoke again. Her voice was the same dry whisper. "Neovd." Stefan and Anya turned to look at her. "What?" Stefan asked. She shook her head slowly, her gaze directed at the station platform outside. "Neovd," she repeated, more firmly this time. "Not here." A whistle blew. Milos hopped back on the train, and with a familiar lurch, we started moving again, pulling away from the sanctuary of the Nixik station. Anya slumped back into her seat, defeated, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered to no one in particular. Why did she say that? I didn't know, but her words had felt like a command. Coming from the woman who had warned us about the empty bunk, it had been enough to make Stefan hesitate, enough to make us miss our chance. We were still on the train, still trapped. The mood in the compartment grew even darker. Stefan put his arm around Anya, trying to soothe her, but he kept glancing nervously toward the window. The landscape outside, which had seemed so beautiful, now felt like a prison. The mountains were walls hemming us in. The tunnels were gateways to the thing that stalked us. I found myself watching the old woman, She had become the focal point of my fear and my curiosity. Who was she? Was she a victim, like us? Or was she a part of it? Her warnings, her strange pronouncements, they seemed designed to help, but her presence felt like an anchor, holding the dread in our small compartment. Her stillness, her silence, it was all part of the oppressive atmosphere. I decided I had to know more. I leaned forward. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice quiet but direct. "What is happening on this train?" She opened her eyes and looked at me. For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice still a low rasp, but clearer this time, speaking slow, heavily accented English. "I have made this journey many times," she said, her eyes holding mine. "My son, he was a builder. On this line, one of the youth workers Stefan spoke of." Her gaze flickered towards Stefan, showing she had been listening all along. "He fell from the viaduct, the high one, Mala Rijeka." Stefan and Anya stopped whispering and turned to listen, their own fear momentarily forgotten. "They did not find his body," the woman continued, her voice devoid of emotion, as if reciting a story learned by heart. "The canyon is deep, the river is fast. They said he was washed away." She paused, her eyes drifting to the window. "But he is not gone. He is tied to this place, to the track. Sometimes the train moves too fast and he is left behind. But when it stops in the dark, he tries to get on. He wants to come home." My blood ran cold. The face in the window, the pale man, her son, and the thing in the bunk? I whispered, my voice barely audible. The tapping, her eyes shifted to the bunk above my head. A flicker of something, perhaps fear, crossed her face. "He is not the only one," she whispered. "Many died building this line. Not all of them are at peace. They are hungry. They are drawn to the living. They are empty, and they want to be filled." She pointed again at the bunk. "Praisen," she said, the word now carrying a terrible weight. "It must stay empty. If you give them a space, they will take it." So the tapping wasn't her son. It was something else, something other. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Anya made a small, whimpering sound and pressed her face harder into Stefan's shoulder. "So you ride the train to, what? To watch for him?" Stefan asked, his voice full of a horrified disbelief. "I ride to be with him," she corrected, a subtle shift in her tone. "It is the only time I feel him near, but I also ride to keep the others out." She looked directly at me. "The conductor, he knows. He has seen them. He knows the rules. Don't stop in the dark. Don't let them on. Don't leave an empty space." A horrifying thought bloomed in my mind. Our couchette was a 6-bunk compartment. 4 of us were in it. Me, the old woman, Stefan, and Anya. The bunk above me was empty. The one above her was empty too. 2 empty spaces. Before I could process this, we were plunged into darkness again. Another tunnel. The roar was deafening. Instinctively, we all braced ourselves. I squeezed my eyes shut, not wanting to see the face in the window, but there was no tapping on the glass. Instead, a loud, solid thud came from directly across the compartment, from the empty bunk above the old woman's head. My eyes flew open. Stefan and Anya were staring, horrified, at the ceiling on the other side of the car. The old woman did not look up. She simply bowed her head, clutching her rosary, her lips moving in a silent, desperate prayer. Another thud, heavier this time, then a slow, dragging, scraping sound. The exact same sound I had heard last night from the bunk above my own. But now it was over there. Something was in the compartment with us. It had taken the space. The roar of the tunnel was a physical presence, a vibrating wall of sound that seemed to hold us in suspended animation. But the scraping sound from the bunk above the old woman was distinct, a terrifying counter-rhythm to the noise of the train. It was the sound of immense effort, of dead weight being laboriously shifted. It scraped from the wall towards the corridor, a mirror image of the horror I'd experienced the night before. Anya was making a continuous, high-pitched keening sound, her knuckles pressed against her mouth. Stefan had his arms wrapped around her like a shield, his own face a mask of disbelief. He was staring at the ceiling panel above the old woman, his breath fogging in the cold air that had once again begun to seep into the compartment. The cold was back. It wasn't the subtle chill from before. It was an aggressive, predatory cold that sank its teeth into our flesh. I could see my own breath again, thick and white. The windows were beginning to frost over, not from the edges this time, but in a chaotic, spider-webbing pattern that radiated from the center of the glass. The dragging sound stopped. A heavy silence fell within our tiny space, a silence made more profound by the thundering noise outside. The thing in the bunk had stopped moving. I held my breath, my ears straining. What was it doing? The train shot out of the tunnel. Light and relative silence crashed back into the compartment. The sudden change was disorienting, like being slapped awake. The intense cold vanished in an instant. The frost on the windows dissolved into beads of condensation that ran down the glass like tears. The compartment was just a compartment again. But we all knew it wasn't. Our gazes were locked on the bunk above the old woman. It looked exactly as it had before. An empty space with a coarse, folded blanket. But it wasn't empty. We all knew something was there, lying in wait. The old woman hadn't moved. She remained a statue of grief, her head bowed. She hadn't even looked up. Did she know what had just happened? Did she feel the presence just inches above her head? Stefan finally broke the silence. His voice was a raw, ragged whisper. "We have to get out of this car. Now." He scrambled to his feet, pulling Anya with him. He didn't even bother gathering their things. He just yanked the compartment door open and stumbled out into the corridor. "Come on," he urged me, his eyes wild with panic. I didn't need a second invitation. I launched myself off my bunk and followed them, almost tripping over my own feet. As I exited, I glanced back. The old woman hadn't moved. She was still sitting there, alone now, with the unseen thing that occupied the bunk above her. She was a warden in her own private hell. The corridor felt safer, but only marginally. At least here there were other people, other compartments. The illusion of normalcy. Stefan was hammering on the door of the compartment next to ours. "Hello? Is anyone in there? Open the door!" he yelled, his voice cracking. The door slid open to reveal a bleary-eyed man in his 50s, his shirt unbuttoned, looking furious at being disturbed. "What is it? What do you want?" he demanded in Serbian. Stefan, in his panic, seemed to have forgotten he didn't speak the language. "There's something in our room. Something on the train," he shouted in English. The man just stared at him, his expression shifting from anger to confusion and then to dismissal. He said something sharp and dismissive and made to close the door. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. I didn't know much Serbian, but I knew a few basic phrases from my travel guide. I tried to piece something together. "Malam, pomak," I stammered. "Please, help. Problem, vagon. Problem, carriage." The man's eyes flickered to me, then back to the panicked German couple. He looked at our faces, at Anya's tear-streaked cheeks and Stefan's desperation. He must have seen that our fear was genuine. He hesitated, his hand on the door. Then, from down the corridor, we heard a voice. "What is this noise? Go back to your compartments." It was Milos, the conductor. He was striding towards us, his face a thundercloud of fury. "There's something in our compartment." Stefan yelled at him, pointing back towards our open door. "We heard it. We all heard it." Milos's eyes darted to our open doorway, then back to us. For a fraction of a second, I saw that same flicker of fear I'd seen last night. But it was quickly suppressed, replaced by an iron mask of authority. "There is nothing," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You are drunk. You are scaring other passengers. Go back to your compartment now, or I will have police waiting for you in Podgorica." "We are not drunk," Anya cried. "There is something in there. That woman." "Enough!" Milos roared, taking a step closer. He was a large, intimidating man, and his anger was palpable. The man in the neighboring compartment, seeing the conductor's rage, quickly slid his door shut, leaving us alone with him in the corridor. Go. Back. Now. Stefan looked from Milos's furious face to the open door of our compartment. He looked at Anya, who was shaking. He was trapped. To defy the conductor meant facing the authorities. To go back in that room meant facing something far worse. We will stand in the corridor, Stefan said, his voice trembling but firm. We will not go back in that room. Milos stared at him, his jaw clenched. The two men were locked in a silent battle of wills. The train rattled and swayed beneath our feet. I glanced at the window. We were entering another stretch of dense forest, the trees crowding the tracks, casting the carriage in a gloomy, flickering light. Another tunnel was coming. I could feel it. Suddenly, Milos's expression changed. His anger seemed to drain away, replaced by a look of weary resignation. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Fine, he said, his voice dropping. He looked up and down the empty corridor. Fine. Do not go back in there. Stay here. And be quiet. He looked at me. You too. Stay with them. His sudden capitulation was more terrifying than his anger had been. It was an admission of guilt. An admission that he knew we were telling the truth. He turned and looked into our compartment. He didn't step inside. He just stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the empty bunk above the old woman's seat. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at the woman herself. She met his gaze, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. There was no communication, no expression, just a shared, grim understanding. Finally, Milos reached out, took the handle, and slid our compartment door shut, sealing the old woman inside with her unseen companion. He turned back to us, his face pale. We will be in Podgorica in 30 minutes, he said quietly. Find an empty seat in another car if you must. But do not speak of this to anyone. Do you understand? No one. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked stiffly back towards the vestibule at the front of the car, leaving the three of us standing alone in the narrow corridor. We looked at each other, a trio of terrified strangers bound by an impossible secret. The closed door of our compartment seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The old woman was in there, alone. Had she chosen this? Was this her penance, her eternal vigil? What do we do? Anya whispered. We do what he says, Stefan replied, his voice flat. We find somewhere else to sit. We stumbled down the corridor, away from that cursed door, peering into other compartments. Most were full. Finally, we found a 6-bunk couchette with only 2 people in it, a pair of young backpackers, fast asleep on the bottom bunks. The 4 upper and middle bunks were empty. We hesitated at the door. An empty space. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. If you give them a space, they will take it. No, Anya said, shaking her head. I can't. I'll stand. Me too, I agreed immediately. The thought of sleeping in another empty bunk on this train was unbearable. Stefan nodded, his face grim. Okay, we'll stand. So we stood there, crowded into the narrow space just outside the sleeping backpackers' compartment, for the next 30 minutes. We didn't speak. We just watched the landscape flash by, our reflections staring back at us from the glass. Every time the trees thickened, every time the light grew dim, we braced ourselves for the darkness of a tunnel. We passed through 3 more. They were short, and mercifully nothing happened. There was no tapping, no faces in the window, but with each one the tension was unbearable. I felt like a soldier waiting for a bomb to fall. Finally, the outskirts of a city began to appear. Concrete apartment blocks replaced the forests. Roads ran parallel to the tracks. The train began to slow, its brakes squealing in protest. A large, sprawling station came into view. A sign declared, in bold letters, Podgorica. Never in my life have I felt such a profound sense of relief. It was like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. The train hissed to a stop. The doors slid open. The sounds of a busy station, announcements over a loudspeaker, the chatter of waiting crowds, the rumble of carts, flooded the carriage. It was the sound of the real world. Stefan, Anya, and I practically fell out of the train and onto the platform, not even looking back. We stumbled into the main concourse of the station, a vast, echoing hall filled with people and light. We just stood there for a moment, blinking in the brightness, taking deep breaths of the warm, diesel-tinged air. We had made it. We were off the train. We were safe. My backpack, with my passport and all my belongings, was still in that compartment. The thought made my stomach clench. "My bag," I said, turning back towards the platform. "I have to get my bag." "No," Stefan said, grabbing my arm. "It's not worth it. Leave it. We'll go to the embassy, your consulate. Just don't go back on that train." He was right. It was a stupid risk. But everything I owned was on that train. I hesitated. As I looked back at the platform, I saw passengers from our carriage disembarking. The two backpackers from the compartment where we had stood. The family with the small children. The man in the suit. They all looked normal, tired from the journey, but untroubled. Had we been the only ones? Then I saw her, the old woman. She was descending the steps of our carriage, moving with the same slow, deliberate shuffle. She still clutched her worn leather purse. Milos, the conductor, was standing on the platform, and he reached out and took her arm, helping her down the last step with a gentleness that was completely at odds with the fury he had shown us. He said something to her in a low voice. She nodded, and then, without looking around, she began to shuffle her way through the crowd and towards the station exit, a small, dark figure disappearing into the bustle of the city. My decision was made. If she could be in there all that time and walk off, I could dash on for 30 seconds to grab my bag. The entity, whatever it was tied to the train, to the journey, not to the station. That's what I told myself. "I'll be right back," I said to Stefan and Anya, pulling my arm free. "Don't wait for me. Go. Get help." Before they could argue, I turned and ran back towards the train. I sprinted across the concrete platform, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of adrenaline and residual fear. The open door of carriage 342 seemed like a dark maw. I didn't slow down, launching myself up the steep metal steps and into the familiar, narrow corridor. The air inside the train was still and stuffy, but it felt different now that it was stationary. The oppressive, malevolent energy had dissipated, leaving behind a stale, neutral emptiness. Or so I hoped. I rushed to my compartment, the door still shut as Milos had left it. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I slid it open and peered inside. The compartment was empty. The old woman's seat was vacant. The unseen presence that had terrified us seemed to have vanished with her. The only thing left was the lingering, cloying scent of stale air and something else. A faint, metallic odor, like old rust or dried blood. My backpack was still there, tucked under the bottom bunk where I had left it what felt like a lifetime ago. I dove into the compartment, grabbed the straps, and began to drag it out. It was heavy and awkward in the confined space. As I tugged, it snagged on something under the bunk. I crouched down, trying to see what it was caught on. In the dim light under the bunk, I saw it. It wasn't part of the train's frame. It was a small, dark object wedged between the support struts. A small, old-fashioned leather-bound book, like a diary or a prayer book. It must have fallen from the old woman's purse. My first instinct was to leave it, get my bag and get out. But curiosity or some other, less rational impulse took over. My fingers closed around it. The leather was cold and brittle, the corners worn smooth with time. I pulled it free and shoved it into the pocket of my jacket without a second thought. My mind focused on the primary goal of escape. I gave my backpack one last, hard yank, came free. I scrambled backwards out of the compartment, dragging the heavy pack with me, not daring to turn my back on the empty bunks for more than a second. As I straightened up in the corridor, I came face to face with Milos. He was standing right there, blocking my path, his expression unreadable. I flinched, expecting him to yell at me again. But he just looked at me, his eyes tired and sad. He glanced at the backpack in my hand. Then his gaze fell to the slight bulge in my jacket pocket where I had hidden the book. He knew. Some things are better left lost, he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, a piece of advice from one haunted soul to another. I didn't answer, couldn't. I just squeezed past him, my backpack banging against the wall, and stumbled out of the train for the second and final time, gulping in the station air like a drowning man. I didn't look back. I found Stefan and Anya near the main entrance, looking lost and frayed. Anya was speaking frantically into her phone in German, probably to her family. Stefan was just staring into space, his face pale and drawn. The relief on their faces when they saw me was immense. "You got it," Stefan said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Let's go. Let's just get away from here." We walked out of the station and into the bright, chaotic streets of Podgorica. The city was a jarring mix of brutalist Soviet-era architecture and modern glass-fronted shops. The noise of traffic, the chatter of people, the warmth of the sun on my skin. It was all aggressively normal, a world away from the cold, silent horror of the train. We found a small cafe a few blocks from the station and collapsed into chairs at an outdoor table. Anya ordered 3 brandies, one for each of us. It was barely noon, but none of us objected. When the glasses arrived, we downed them in near silence. The fiery liquid burned a welcome trail down my throat, dulling the sharp edges of my fear. "I called my father," Anya said, her voice still shaky. "He's booking us a flight out of here, to Berlin. It leaves tonight. We're going to a hotel near the airport to wait." She looked at me. "What will you do?" "I don't know," I said honestly. My original plan had been to spend a week hiking the Montenegrin coast. The thought now seemed absurd. The beauty of the mountains had been tainted, imbued with a terror I knew I wouldn't be able to shake. "I think I'll get a flight too. Anywhere. Just away from here." We sat for a while longer, the silence between us heavy with the shared trauma we couldn't bring ourselves to articulate. We were 3 strangers from different countries, our paths crossing for less than 12 hours, but we were bonded by an experience that no one else would ever believe. There was a strange comfort in that. We didn't have to explain. We didn't have to justify our fear. We all knew. Stefan paid for the drinks and we stood to leave. "We've booked a taxi," he said. "It should be here any minute." He pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. "Be safe," he said. Anya hugged me as well. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she whispered. "I'm sorry it happened to you too," I replied. The taxi pulled up and they got in. We exchanged one last look, a look of grim understanding, and then they were gone, disappearing into the city traffic, taking a piece of my nightmare with them. I was alone again. I found a cheap guest house not far from the city center, a clean but Spartan room with a single bed and a small, barred window overlooking a quiet side street. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and leaned against it, my body finally succumbing to the exhaustion that had been held at bay by adrenaline. My legs felt like lead. I dropped my backpack on the floor and collapsed onto the bed. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, the events of the last day replaying in my mind like a film loop. The old woman's face, the tapping, the face in the window, the scraping from the empty bunks, Milos's fearful anger. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the darkness of a tunnel, the roar of the train filling my ears. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not for a long time. As dusk fell, casting long shadows across the room, my hand strayed to my jacket pocket. I pulled out the small leather-bound book. It was even older and more worn than I'd first thought. The dark leather was cracked, and the spine was held together by a single frayed thread. There was no title on the cover, no markings of any kind. My heart pounded as I opened it. The pages were thin and brittle, covered in a tight, spidery script. It was Serbian, written in old Cyrillic letters. It was completely unreadable to me, but it wasn't all text. Tucked between the pages, I began to find things. A pressed wildflower, its color faded to a pale, ghostly lavender. A yellowed newspaper clipping, dated from the 1970s, with a photo of a group of smiling young men in work clothes, the youth brigade Stefan had mentioned. And on some pages, there were simple, hand-drawn sketches. One sketch made me drop the book onto the bed. It was a rough charcoal drawing of a face. A pale, oval face with large, dark, empty eyes. It was the face from the window, her son. I frantically flipped through the rest of the pages. There were more drawings. A sketch of the Mala Rijeka viaduct, with a tiny figure falling from its peak. A drawing of the inside of a train compartment, with shadowy, indistinct figures huddled on the bunks. And then, near the end of the book, there was a list. It was a list of names, written in the same spidery hand. Dozens of them. After each name, there was a date. And after the date, a single word. Prazen empty, or Zazit occupied. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Was this her logbook? A record of her journeys? Was she tracking the souls of the dead workers, noting which ones were at peace and which ones were still hungry? The last entry was dated 2 days before my journey. It was a single name, Marco. Next to it, the word Zazit, occupied. My blood ran cold. Was she not trying to keep the entities out? Was she delivering them? Was she a warden or a shepherd? Was she finding empty spaces for the hungry dead? The thought was sickening. Had she been trying to warn us? Or was she simply doing her job, and we were an inconvenience? Her pity. Was it for us or for the spirits she was tending to? I slammed the book shut. I didn't want to know any more. Milos was right. Some things were better left lost. I had to get rid of it. I couldn't just throw it in the trash. That felt disrespectful, dangerous even. I had to take it somewhere far away from me, somewhere it couldn't be found again. I looked at my phone and pulled up a map of Podgorica. My eyes fell on the river that ran through the city, the Maraca. It was the same river system, I realized with a jolt, that flowed through the canyon beneath the Mala Rijeka viaduct. I knew what I had to do. I left the guest house and walked through the darkening city streets. The air was cool now, and the city was alive with evening activity. But I felt completely detached from it all. A ghost moving through a world I was no longer fully a part of. The book was a lead weight in my pocket. I found a bridge crossing the river. The water below was a dark, rushing ribbon in the twilight. I stood in the middle of the bridge, cars speeding past me, and pulled the book from my pocket. I held it for a moment, its cold, brittle leather a conduit to the terror of the train. I thought of the old woman, of her son, of the hungry things in the darkness. With a final, decisive movement, I threw the book as hard as I could over the railing. It arced through the air, a small, dark shape against the dying light, and hit the water with a faint splash that was instantly swallowed by the sound of the current. It was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I stood there for a long time, watching the river flow, feeling the connection to that train, to that night, finally being severed. The next morning, I booked the first flight I could get to Rome. It felt arbitrary, but it was west. It was away. As my plane took off, climbing high above the rugged, beautiful, terrifying mountains of Montenegro, I stared out the window until they were nothing but a crumpled, distant line on the horizon. I didn't look back. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? I tried to forget it, to bury it under the weight of new experiences and new places. For the most part, I succeeded. It became a half-remembered nightmare, its edges blurred by time. But some things linger. Even now, years later, I can't sleep on trains. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm in that state between waking and sleeping, I hear it. Faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. And I find myself wondering about the little leather book, tumbling in the dark currents at the bottom of the Maraca River. And I wonder if the last page, the one for my journey, was ever filled in. And if it was, which word was written there next to the date? Prazen or Zazit? Empty or occupied? Rome was my escape. For 5 years, it worked. The city is a chaotic, beautiful symphony of life, loud enough to drown out the quietest ghosts. I built a new existence here, one deliberately devoid of the things that reminded me of that journey. I worked as a freelance historical researcher and translator, a job that kept me surrounded by the dusty, benign phantoms of the distant past. I lived in an old apartment in Trastevere with thick stone walls that muffled the world, and I never, ever took a train. Not even the metro. I walked, I took the bus, I paid for taxis. The inconvenience was a small price to pay for peace of mind. The trauma didn't disappear, of course. It simply scabbed over. It became a quiet, manageable part of me. There were still nights I'd jolt awake, the phantom roar of a tunnel in my ears, and the tapping. That never really went away. I'd hear it sometimes in the dead of night. Tap, 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 faint and distant. I told myself it was the ancient plumbing in my building, the settling of a centuries-old foundation. It was easy to rationalize in a city as old as Rome. The illusion of control began to fray about 6 months ago. I was on a video call with a client in Munich, discussing a 17th century manuscript. We were deep into the details when he paused, a frown on his face. "Excuse me," he said, "but could you possibly ask them to stop? It is very distracting." I froze. "Ask who to stop what?" "The knocking," he said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "It has been going on for the last 5 minutes. A very steady, rhythmic knocking. It sounds like someone is right there in the room with you, tapping on your desk." I was sitting alone in my silent apartment. There was no sound, but he could hear it all the way in Munich through a microphone that was picking up a sound that I, in the same room, could not. I stared at my own desk. The smooth, dark wood was empty except for my laptop and a cup of coffee. Tap, tap, tap. He was hearing it through my computer. I mumbled an apology, blaming construction in the building next door, and ended the call as quickly as I could. I sat there for a long time, my blood like ice water in my veins. The scab had been torn off. The thing that had haunted me wasn't just in my head anymore. It was externalizing. It was finding ways to make itself known. After that, things escalated, but subtly. A book would fall from a shelf for no reason. I'd come home to find a cupboard door standing wide open. I'd feel a sudden, intense chill in a corner of the room, the same bone-deep cold from the train. I was living in a state of low-grade, constant vigilance, the way a person does when they know their house is no longer secure. I thought about moving, but I had a horrifying suspicion that it wouldn't matter. The problem wasn't the apartment. It was me. Then, 2 weeks ago, I received an email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, a simple Gmail account. The subject line contained just 2 words, "The train." My hands started shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse to click on it. The email was short, written in the slightly formal, stilted English of a non-native speaker. It was from Stefan. "Hello, asterisk, I hope this email finds you. I have spent a long time trying to find a way to contact you. I found your professional website and I believe you are the American we met on the train from Belgrade to Bar 5 years ago. I hope I am not mistaken. Asterisk. Asterisk, I am writing to you because I am desperate. Anya and we are not well. After we left you in Podgorica, we thought it was over. We took a flight. We went home to Berlin. We tried to forget, but it did not stay on the train. Asterisk. Asterisk, it is the little things. A sound in the night. A face in a reflection. Anya sees him sometimes, the pale man standing across the street, just watching our building. I tell her it is impossible, but then I will be at work and I will feel someone watching me. I will hear a tapping sound coming from the empty cubicle next to mine. She cannot sleep. She barely eats. She was a painter, so full of life. Now she does not touch her canvases. She just sits by the window. Asterisk. Asterisk, last month, she was hospitalized. A breakdown. She told the doctors that a man was whispering to her from the vents in her room at night. They have given her medication. They say it is stress, shared psychosis, post-traumatic stress. But we know what it is. It followed us. Or a piece of it did. Asterisk. Asterisk, I must ask you. I am sorry to bring this back to you after all this time. But I must know. Are you all right? Have you experienced anything? Are we the only ones? Are we going crazy? Asterisk. Please, if this is you, write back. Yours, Stefan. I read the email 3 times, each word a hammer blow against the fragile piece I had constructed. I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining it. And Stefan and Anya, the happy, cheerful couple, their lives had been systematically dismantled by this thing. Anya was in a hospital. The thought filled me with a profound sense of guilt and horror. I felt a strange, dual emotion. On the one hand, a terrifying validation. The haunting was real, confirmed by an independent source. On the other hand, the crushing despair of knowing there had been no escape. We had all run in different directions from that station in Podgorica, but we were all still trapped in that compartment, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I closed my laptop. My hands were steady now. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being replaced by something else. A slow-burning anger. This thing had ruined Anya's life. It was destroying Stefan's, and it had been chipping away at mine for 5 years. I thought of the little leather book I had thrown into the river. I had been so sure that severing that physical link was the answer. But what if the link wasn't the book? What if the link was us? We had been in that space. We had been marked by it. I opened my laptop again and began to type. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't ignore his plea. I couldn't leave them to suffer alone. My first search wasn't for flights to Berlin. It was for the Belgrade Bar Railway, for the Mala Rijeka Viaduct, for news reports of accidents during its construction, for a list of names. I didn't have the book anymore, but I remembered one, the last one I'd read before I threw it away. Marco. My research began as a frantic, scattered attempt to grasp at anything solid in a sea of supernatural dread. I scoured the internet for hours, plunging into digital archives of old Yugoslavian newspapers, academic papers on post-war infrastructure projects, and obscure local history forums. Most of it was useless, dry accounts of tons of concrete poured and kilometers of track laid. But slowly, buried in the footnotes and the tangential remarks, a picture began to emerge. The Belgrade Bar Railway wasn't just an engineering marvel. It was a national obsession, a symbol of unity and progress for Tito's Yugoslavia. The youth work brigades weren't just laborers. They were a generation's rite of passage, young men and women from all over the Federation, volunteering their summers to build a better future. The official histories were heroic, filled with black and white photos of smiling, sun-browned youths holding shovels. But on the forums, in the threads written in Serbian that I painstakingly fed through translation software, a different story unfolded. The work was brutal and dangerous. Safety standards were lax. The official death toll was low, but the anecdotal evidence suggested it was much, much higher. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of young workers had died, their deaths often unrecorded, their bodies lost to the treacherous mountain terrain. They were the forgotten sacrifices laid at the altar of progress. I found several mentions of the Mala Rijeka Viaduct as a place of particular tragedy. The Bridge of Sighs, one old post called it. Another user recounted a story his grandfather, a foreman on the project, used to tell, that the concrete piers were so vast, workers who fell inside during the pour were simply left there, their bodies entombed within the very structure they were building. The viaduct, the highest in Europe, wasn't just a bridge of steel and concrete. It was a vertical cemetery. Then I found him, Marko Jovanovic. It was in a digitized copy of a small, local Montenegrin newspaper from 1975. The article was brief, a short paragraph on an inside page. It mentioned a tragic accident near Collison. A rockslide had swept away a small work camp during the night. 3 youths were listed as missing, presumed dead. One of them was Marko. The article noted that he was from a small village just outside Belgrade. The other 2 names on the list were ones I didn't recognize. Zauzit, occupied. The word from the old woman's book echoed in my mind. Marko had found his space. I spent 2 days immersed in this dark history, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of purpose. I replied to Stefan, telling him everything. That he wasn't crazy, that I had experienced it too. I told him about the old woman, her son who had fallen from the viaduct, and my brief, terrifying possession of her logbook. I told him what I had learned about the railway's construction and the sheer number of unrecorded deaths. His reply came within the hour. It was filled with a desperate, grateful energy. Asterisk, thank you. God, thank you. Just to know that we are not insane is... I cannot describe the relief. Anya, read your email. For the first time in months, I saw a light in her eyes. It is not just a story we are telling ourselves. It is real. Asterisk. Asterisk, I have an idea. It is perhaps a crazy one, but we have tried doctors. We have tried moving to a new apartment. Nothing works. The only thing we have not tried is to go back. Asterisk. Asterisk, I found the name of the old woman. Her name is Elena. I found her through a church in her neighborhood in Belgrade. She attends services there every week. The priest said she is a woman of great sadness, that she lost her only son many years ago and has been in mourning ever since. He said she travels the railway once a month, every month. He thinks it is a pilgrimage, a way to be close to her son's final resting place. Asterisk. Asterisk, what if we meet her? What if we talk to her? She knows what this is. She has been living with it for decades. Maybe she knows how to make it stop. I want to go to Belgrade, and I am asking if you would consider coming with us. I know it is an incredible thing to ask, but you are the only other person on earth who understands. I will pay for everything. Your flight, your hotel. Anya cannot travel in her condition. She will stay with her parents. But I must do this. Asterisk. I read Stefan's proposal and my immediate gut reaction was a resounding no. Go back? Back to the place where it all began. The thought was terrifying. Rome was my fortress. Going back felt like willingly walking into the lion's den. But then I thought of Anya, a ghost of her former self in a hospital bed. I thought of Stefan, a man so desperate he was willing to confront his greatest fear head-on. And I thought of myself, living a half-life, perpetually looking over my shoulder, a prisoner in my own home. Stefan was right. We had tried running. The only thing we hadn't tried was turning around to face it. My fear was still there, but my anger was greater. I was done being haunted. 3 days later, I was on a flight to Belgrade. The city was just as I remembered it. A grand, gritty metropolis humming with a restless energy. Stefan was waiting for me at the arrival's gate. He looked older than I remembered, his friendly face etched with lines of worry, his hair showing flecks of gray at the temples. We greeted each other not like old friends, but like fellow soldiers meeting before a battle, a grim solidarity passing between us. We checked into a small, modern hotel and spent the rest of the day planning. Stefan had the address of the church Elena attended. Our plan was simple, perhaps naively so. We would go to the church for the Sunday service the next morning and wait for her. We would try to talk to her. We would beg her for help. That night, sleep was impossible. My hotel room felt cold, and the silence was heavy with anticipation. I kept thinking about the train, about the darkness, about the thing that had followed us. Was it attached to Elena? Was it a regional phenomenon, confined to the tracks? Or was it something more mobile, something that had latched onto us and followed us across a continent? The next morning, we took a taxi to a quiet, residential neighborhood of old, crumbling villas and towering chestnut trees. The church was a small, modest Orthodox chapel, its dome a brilliant copper green against the gray sky. We were early. We stood across the street, watching as the parishioners began to arrive. Old couples, young families, solitary men and women dressed in their Sunday best. And then we saw her. She was unmistakable, dressed in the same dark, heavy clothes, her hair covered by a black scarf. She moved with the same slow, shuffling walk. She seemed smaller than I remembered, more fragile. She carried the same worn leather purse. She looked like any other old woman on her way to pray. But we knew she wasn't. We watched her disappear inside the church. What do we do? I whispered to Stefan. Do we go in? No, he said, his voice firm. We don't interrupt her in there. That's her sanctuary. We wait. We wait until she comes out. We waited for over an hour. We stood under the shade of a chestnut tree, two nervous foreigners trying to look inconspicuous. Finally, the service ended. The parishioners began to trickle out, chatting in the morning sun. We waited until the crowd thinned, and then she emerged. She stood on the top step of the church for a moment, blinking in the light, one hand clutching her purse, the other her rosary. She looked tired, ancient, burdened by a weight we could only begin to comprehend. Stefan took a deep breath. "Now," he said. We crossed the street and approached her slowly, respectfully. She saw us coming. Her eyes, those dark, sad pools, widened almost imperceptibly. She recognized us. A flicker of something, alarm, maybe even fear, crossed her face. She took a half step back, as if to retreat into the safety of the church. "Elena," Stefan said, his voice gentle. He had learned her name. That seemed important. "Please, we don't want to harm you. We just need to talk to you. We were on the train 5 years ago, from here to Bar. Do you remember us?" She stared at him, then her gaze shifted to me. She remembered. Her knuckles were white where she clutched her purse. "We need your help," I said, my voice pleading. It didn't stop. It didn't stay on the train. It followed us. To Berlin. To Rome. It's destroying our lives. Elena listened, her expression unreadable. The last of the parishioners had gone. We were alone with her on the sidewalk in front of the church. She looked from my face to Stefan's, her eyes lingering on the desperation etched there. She seemed to be having an internal struggle, her fear warring with the pity I had seen from her on the train. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was the same dry, rasping whisper I remembered so vividly. "It did not follow you," she said, her English slow and deliberate. "You took it with you." "What do you mean?" Stefan asked, confused. "How?" She lifted a trembling hand and pointed, not at Stefan, but at me. "You took my book," she whispered, her voice cracking with a sudden, raw anguish. "My son's book, his record. It is an anchor, connects this world to that one. You took the anchor and you broke the chain." A vortex of guilt and horror opened up in my stomach. The book, I had thought it was a clue, a piece of evidence. I never imagined it was a tool, a functional object. An anchor. By taking it, I hadn't just stolen her journal. I had stolen a piece of supernatural machinery I didn't understand. And by throwing it in the river, I had... What? Unleashed something? I didn't know. I stammered, the words feeling pathetic and hollow. "I found it under the bunk. I thought it was just a diary. I threw it in the river in Podgorica. I was scared. I wanted to get rid of it." Elena's face, which had been a mask of sorrow, crumpled into an expression of pure despair. She let out a low moan and stumbled back, steadying herself against the iron railing of the church steps. "The river," she whispered, shaking her head. "The river that took him. You have given it all back to the water. You have undone everything." "Undone what?" Stefan pressed, stepping forward. "What was the book for? What have we done?" She took a series of shuddering breaths, trying to compose herself. "That book was his life's work," she explained, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. "No, not his life's work. His death's work. When he fell, he did not leave. He was trapped, confused. He saw the others, the ones who died in the rocks and the concrete. The hungry ones, the brazen. They are drawn to the living, to the warmth of the train passing through their cold darkness." She looked at us, her eyes pleading for us to understand. "My son, he was a good boy. Even in death, he is a good boy. He learned to guide them. The book, he led me to it in a dream. It is his. He would show me their faces, tell me their names. When I rode the train, I would write them down. I would find an empty space for them. Zazit, a place for them to rest on the journey, to feel peace. The book was the record, kept them ordered, kept them calm. It bound them to the train, to their place of death, so they would not wander." My mind reeled. The entire narrative I had constructed was wrong. She wasn't a shepherd leading lost souls. She was a zookeeper, and her son was the one inside the cage, trying to keep the other animals from tearing the bars apart. The book wasn't just a log. It was the lock on the cage. "But Marco," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. The one you marked as occupied just before our trip. What did that mean? He was new, she rasped. He died in the rock slide. He was restless, angry. My son told me he was trying to get out, trying to attach himself to a passenger. I had to find a space for him to settle him. That night, the night you were on the train, there was too much energy, too many new souls, too many empty spaces. My son was losing control, and we had been there, 3 living, breathing beacons of warmth and life in the middle of it all. We weren't just passengers, we were bait. So when I took the book, I said, the horrifying realization dawning on me, the connection was broken, the anchor was gone. They are no longer bound to the tracks, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. They are bound to the last people who disturbed their peace. To you. The book held the memory of them, and you carried it away. You spread the seeds of their sorrow. The tapping you hear, the faces you see. They are echoes, pieces of them broken free, looking for the anchor you stole. Stefan looked utterly devastated. So how do we fix it? He asked, his voice cracking. Elena, please. Anya is sick. We are living in a nightmare. How do we give them back their anchor? How do we make this stop? Elena shook her head, a gesture of profound hopelessness. The book is gone, dissolved in the river. The anchor is destroyed. There is no record. They are scattered, adrift. She looked up at the sky, her eyes vacant. I have not felt my son's presence since that night. I ride the train, but he is silent. I think you have untethered him, too. He is lost with the others. The weight of my actions crashed down on me. I hadn't just condemned myself and my friends. I had severed a grieving mother's last connection to her dead son. I had torn him away from his post and left the ghosts of the railway to run wild. There must be something we can do, I insisted, desperation making my voice sharp. We can't just live like this. Elena was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. She looked at Stefan's anguished face, then at mine. The pity returned to her eyes. There is one thing, she said, her voice barely audible. A story. An old story the workers used to tell. A superstition. I never put much faith in it. But now, what is it? Stefan urged, taking a step closer to her. Anything. They said that when a man was lost to the mountain, truly lost, his soul could not find peace until a toll was paid. She said, her eyes dark. Not money. A sacrifice, something of great personal value, left at the site of their death. Something that would tie the soul of the lost back to the world of the living, to a memory of love, so they would not be consumed by the hunger of the mountain itself. A sacrifice? Stefan repeated, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. What kind of sacrifice? A personal one, Elena stressed. It must have belonged to you. It must carry your memories, your energy. A photograph, a piece of jewelry, a letter, something you have treasured. She looked at us, her gaze heavy. And it must be left where they were lost. For my son, the Mala Rijeka viaduct. For the others, who knows? They are scattered along the entire line. The implication was clear. We couldn't just fix this from afar. We had to go back to the source. The pale man Anya sees, Stefan said, his voice low. Is that your son? Elena shook her head sadly. My son. He was kind. He would not torment her. No, the face you see is one of the others. One of the Praisen. He has attached himself to you because you are a beacon of warmth in his cold world. He is not evil. He is just empty, and he wants to be full. We stood there on the Belgrade sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. The path forward was insane. It involved a journey back into the heart of our trauma, armed with nothing but a half-remembered superstition and a handful of personal trinkets. But it was the only path we had. Okay, Stefan said, his voice filled with a new, grim resolve. Okay, we'll do it. He looked at me. Are you with me? I looked at Elena, at her grief-stricken face. I thought of my apartment in Rome, which had become my prison. I thought of Anya, fading away in a hospital. The fear was a cold, hard not inside me, but underneath it, for the first time in 5 years, was a flicker of agency, a chance to undo the damage I had caused. "Yes," I said, "I'm with you." Elena seemed to draw strength from our decision. She straightened up, some of the fragility leaving her. "Then you must do it properly," she said, her voice taking on a new tone of authority. "You cannot just go and throw things from the bridge. That will do nothing. You must go at night. You must go when the veil between the worlds is thin. You must go when the train is passing." My blood ran cold. "During the night train?" "Yes," she said. "The train is the catalyst. It is what stirs them. Its passing is the moment they are most present, most aware. You must be there on the viaduct when the night train to Bar crosses. You must make your offering as it passes so they know it is for them, so they feel the warmth of the living reaching out to them." The plan was no longer just insane. It was a potential suicide mission. Getting to the Mala Rijeka viaduct at night, a remote bridge in the middle of the Montenegrin mountains, and waiting there in the dark for the very train that had been the vessel of our horror. It was a terrifying proposition. "How do we even get there?" I asked. "It's in the middle of nowhere. There is a service road," Elena said, "from the old construction days. It is not on any modern maps. But I know the way. I will draw you a map." She opened her worn purse. "But you will need more than that. You will need a guide. Someone who knows the mountains, who is not afraid of the dark or of stories." She fumbled inside the purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She wrote a name and a phone number on it. "His name is Dragan. He lives in Kalasin. He is a hunter. His grandfather was a foreman on the railway. He knows the stories. He knows the roads. Tell him Elena sent you. Tell him you need to pay the toll." She handed the paper to Stefan. Her hand was trembling, but her eyes were clear. "Go," she said. "Do this. For your friend. For your own peace. And perhaps for my son, too. Perhaps if you can quiet the others, he can finally find his own rest." Without another word, she turned and shuffled away down the street, a small, black-clad figure disappearing into the life of the city, leaving us holding a hastily drawn map to our own personal hell and a phone number for a man who might be our only hope. We were going back to the mountains. The flight from Belgrade to Podgorica was a grim, silent affair. We didn't speak, each of us lost in our own thoughts, contemplating the sheer madness of what we were about to do. From Podgorica, we rented a car, a sturdy, unassuming Dacia Duster that looked like it could handle rough roads. The 2-hour drive north to Kalasin was a journey back in time, away from the modern capital and deep into the rugged, timeless heart of Montenegro. The mountains loomed larger and larger, their jagged peaks scraping the sky, beautiful and deeply menacing. They were no longer just a landscape. They were a living entity, the tomb of the men we were trying to appease. Kalasin was a small, quiet mountain town, a hub for skiing in the winter and hiking in the summer. We found a small, family-run guest house. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and wood smoke. It felt peaceful, but it was the peace of a graveyard. We both knew what lay just a few kilometers away, hidden in the folds of these mountains. That evening, in our small, wood-paneled room, we prepared. We laid out our sacrifices. The instructions from Elena were clear. Something of great personal value. Something that carried our memories. Stefan had brought a small silver locket. He opened it to show me. On one side was a tiny, smiling photo of Anya, taken on the day he had proposed to her on a beach in Portugal. On the other side was a photo of them together, laughing. "This was the happiest day of my life," he said quietly, his thumb stroking the image of her face. "I gave this to her on our first anniversary. She gave it back to me before I left Berlin. She said I should use it to bring her back." The raw pain in his voice was a physical thing in the room. My own choice had been harder. My life felt transient, my possessions functional. But I had one thing. It was my grandfather's compass. He had been a sailor in his youth and had carried it across every ocean on Earth. He gave it to me when I was a boy, telling me it would always help me find my way home. It was heavy, made of brass, the glass face scratched from decades of use. It was my most tangible link to my family, to my past, to the concept of a safe harbor. It was the one thing I had always kept with me through all my travels. Giving it up felt like cutting off a limb. We sat there, looking at the locket and the compass on the small wooden table between us. They looked so small, so inadequate against the immense supernatural grief we were trying to combat. The next morning, Stefan made the call. He dialed the number Elena had given us. The phone rang for a long time. We were both holding our breath. Just as he was about to hang up, a man answered. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. Stefan explained in hesitant, careful English who we were. He said Elena had sent us. He said we needed to pay the toll. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. We could hear the faint sound of a dog barking in the background. Elena, the man finally said, the name spoken with a mixture of reverence and sadness. I have not heard from that poor woman in years. Another pause. The Mala Rijeka. I know the place, and I know the stories. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. The night train passes the viaduct around 2 in the morning. If you want to do this, you must be serious. This is not a game for tourists looking for ghost stories. We are serious, Stefan said, his voice firm, desperately serious. Meet me at the cafe on the main square, the man said. 1 hour. I will be wearing a green jacket. The line went dead. Dragan was a man who seemed to be carved from the mountain itself. He was in his late 60s, with a thick mane of white hair, a weathered face crisscrossed with deep lines, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through us. He sat nursing a tiny cup of thick, black coffee, a massive German shepherd-like dog lying patiently at his feet. The dog lifted its head as we approached and watched us with an unnerving intelligence, but didn't make a sound. We sat down. Dragan didn't offer any pleasantries. He just stared at us, his gaze intense, assessing. Elena sent you, he stated, not a question, to feed the bridge. To pay a toll, I corrected gently. Dragan let out a short, harsh laugh. A toll, a sacrifice, a meal. The names change. The mountain does not. It is always hungry. He took a sip of his coffee. You are not the first. Over the years, a few others have come. Relatives of the lost boys. They come with their stories of hauntings, of bad luck, of nightmares that follow them across the world. They think a small trinket will buy them peace. Does it work? Stefan asked, his voice tight with hope. Dragan shrugged, a slow, deliberate movement of his powerful shoulders. Sometimes, for a while, the mountain has a long memory, but a short attention span. A new, shiny memory can distract it, but it always gets hungry again. He leaned forward, his blue eyes boring into us. I will take you. I will take you because Elena asked. She is a good woman who has suffered a great burden. But I will not go onto the bridge with you. My grandfather told me 2 things. Never turn your back on a wolf, and never set foot on that viaduct after dark. The dog will not go either. We will take you to the service road, to the edge of the clearing. The rest of the journey you make on your own. His words did little to reassure us, but we had no other choice. We agreed. He told us to meet him at the same spot at 10 o'clock that night. He told us to bring warm clothes, powerful flashlights, and whatever courage we could find. The rest of the day was a blur of quiet, nervous anticipation. We tried to eat, but the food tasted like cardboard. We tried to rest, but our minds raced. We were walking willingly into the heart of the storm. At 10 p.m., we met him. He was waiting by a battered old Lada Niva, a Russian-made 4x4 that looked like it had been in a war. The big dog, whose name we learned was Vuk, which meant wolf, hopped into the back. We squeezed into the passenger seats. The interior of the Lada smelled of wet dog, oil, and something faintly herbal, like dried mountain sage. Dragan drove out of the town and turned onto a narrow, unpaved road that quickly devolved into a deeply rutted dirt track. For over an hour, we bounced and jostled our way up into the dark mountains, the Lada's engine whining in protest. There were no lights out here, just the brilliant, cold spray of the stars above and the two cones of our headlights cutting a path through the suffocating darkness of the pine forest. Finally, he brought the car to a stop in a small, overgrown clearing. He cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute, profound. "This is it," Dragan said, his voice a low rumble. "The service road is that way." He pointed to a barely visible path leading deeper into the woods. "Follow it for maybe 2 kilometers. It will take you right to the northern end of the viaduct. You will hear it before you see it." He checked his watch. "You have about an hour and a half before the train. Do not be late, and do not linger after it has passed. The air, it becomes heavy." We got out of the car. The air was bitingly cold. Vuk whined softly from the back of the Lada, refusing to get out, his eyes fixed on the dark path. "Good luck," Dragan said. It sounded less like a wish and more like a grim statement of fact. "You will need it." He didn't wait for us to reply. He started the engine, turned the Lada around in a tight, difficult maneuver, and drove back the way we came, his red taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving us utterly alone in the vast, silent Montenegrin wilderness. For a moment, we just stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of what we were doing. The silence was so deep it felt like a pressure on my eardrums. Then Stefan clicked on his flashlight. I clicked on mine. The powerful beams cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow, overgrown path choked with weeds and loose rocks. "Well," Stefan said, his voice sounding small and thin in the vast emptiness. "No turning back now." We started walking. The path was steep and treacherous. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the faint breeze, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I clutched the brass compass in my pocket, its cold, solid weight a small, inadequate comfort. After what felt like an eternity, we heard it, a low, humming sound, carried on the wind. It was the sound of the viaduct itself, the wind singing through its massive steel structure. We were getting close. The path opened up and we were there. The sight was staggering, even in the dark. The Mala Rijeka viaduct was a monster of concrete and steel, leaping across a vast, black chasm. The northern end was right in front of us, a flat expanse of concrete and railway tracks disappearing into the darkness. We could see the faint lights of a village twinkling in the valley thousands of feet below, a world away. The humming was louder here, a constant low-frequency thrum that vibrated up through the soles of our feet. Felt like the bridge was alive. We walked out onto the edge of the tracks, our flashlight beams dancing across the gravel and the twin lines of steel that stretched out over the abyss. There was a narrow walkway on the side, a flimsy-looking metal grid with a simple railing. This was where we had to stand. We stood there, waiting in the cold and the dark, our flashlights pointed down the tracks, waiting for the first sign of the train. The wind howled around us, a mournful, lonely sound. The minutes stretched into an eternity. And then, a new sound joined the humming of the bridge and the howling of the wind. It was a quiet, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from everywhere at once. From the steel girders below us, from the concrete piers disappearing into the darkness, from the very air around us. It was the sound of 100 invisible hands, knocking patiently on the structure, awakened by our presence. The mountain was stirring. We saw a light in the distance, a single, bright point of light, growing steadily larger. The night train, it was coming. The approaching light was hypnotic, a single, unblinking eye in the vast darkness. As it grew closer, we could feel a new vibration through the metal walkway, a deep, rhythmic shudder that resonated with the frantic pounding in my chest. The train was coming, and with it, the moment of truth. The tapping grew more insistent, more chaotic. It was a cacophony now, a frantic, desperate knocking from a legion of unseen things. Tap, 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 tap. It was the sound of 1,000 trapped souls realizing that company had arrived. The air grew thick and heavy, the temperature dropping so sharply that our breath plumed in thick, white clouds in our flashlight beams. The same predatory cold from the train compartment was enveloping us, a tangible presence on the bridge. "Get it ready," Stefan yelled over the rising wind and the noise of the approaching train. I pulled my grandfather's compass from my pocket. The brass was so cold it burned my fingers. Stefan fumbled with the chain of the silver locket, his hands shaking. The train was closer now, its horn blasting a deafening, mournful cry that echoed through the canyon. It was the sound of a great beast announcing its arrival. The locomotive thundered past us, a whirlwind of noise and diesel fumes and sheer, terrifying power. The force of its passage almost knocked us off our feet. I grabbed the railing to steady myself, my knuckles white. Then the carriages began to fly by, their windows fleeting squares of light, illuminating glimpses of sleeping passengers, oblivious to the drama unfolding just feet from their beds. "Now!" Stefan screamed. He held the locket out over the railing, its silver form catching the light from the passing windows. "For Anya!" he cried, his voice raw with anguish and love. "Take this and leave her be. Find your peace." He opened his hand, and the locket fell, a tiny silver spark swallowed instantly by the immense blackness of the chasm below. My turn. My hand was trembling so violently I could barely open my fingers. I held the compass out over the void. The train was still roaring past, a blur of metal and light. I thought of my grandfather, of home, of safety. I was offering up my own anchor. "Please," I whispered, the word torn from my lips by the wind. "Let this be enough. Find your way." I let go. The heavy brass compass dropped, silent and immediate, into the abyss. It was gone. The last carriage, number 342, rattled by. For a horrifying split second, I saw a face in one of the windows. A pale, oval face with large, dark eyes, looking out not at the bridge, but directly at me. It was the old woman's son. His expression wasn't threatening. It was one of quiet, profound gratitude. And then he was gone. The train's red taillights receded into the darkness, the sound of its passage slowly fading, leaving behind a silence that was even more profound than before. The tapping had stopped. The oppressive cold was gone, replaced by the normal, crisp chill of the mountain night. The air felt light again, clean. We stood there, panting, our hands empty, our hearts still hammering. We stared into the darkness where the train had disappeared. Had it worked? Had we just thrown our most treasured possessions into a canyon for nothing? Or had we, against all odds, actually done it? Had we paid the toll? "Did you see him?" I asked Stefan, my voice hoarse. "In the last window? The pale man?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Yes, I saw him." "He didn't look angry," I said. "He looked peaceful." We stood there for a long time, not speaking, just listening to the wind sighing through the viaduct. The bridge no longer felt menacing. It was just a bridge again, a magnificent, sleeping giant of steel and concrete. The humming was just the wind. The silence was just silence. Slowly, carefully, we made our way off the viaduct and back to the overgrown service road. The walk back to the clearing where Dragan had left us was completely different from the walk-in. The woods were just woods. The snapping of twigs was just the sound of our own feet. The fear, the suffocating, paranoid dread that had been our constant companion, was gone. In its place was a fragile, tentative sense of hope. Dragan's Lada was waiting for us in the clearing, just as he'd promised. He was sitting in the driver's seat, smoking, the tip of his cigarette a small orange star in the darkness. Vuk was sitting up in the back, and as we approached, he let out a single low woof and wagged his tail. Dragan got out of the car and looked us over, his piercing blue eyes searching our faces. He nodded slowly. "The air is lighter," he said, a statement of fact. "You fed the bridge. Now we see if it stays full." The drive back to Collison was as quiet as the drive up, but the silence was different. It was no longer a heavy, anticipatory silence. It was a calm, exhausted peace. We stumbled back into our guesthouse room just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. I collapsed onto my bed, fully clothed, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in 5 years. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. Sunlight was streaming through the window. Stefan was sitting at the table, staring at his phone, a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him in Belgrade, he was smiling. A true, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He held up his phone. It was a picture message from Anya. It was a selfie. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, but she was smiling, her eyes bright and clear. The haunted, vacant look was gone. Beneath the photo was a short text in German. Stefan translated it for me, his voice thick with emotion. She wrote, "The sun came out this morning. I think the ghosts have gone home. I love you." Tears welled in Stefan's eyes. He wiped them away with the back of his hand. "It worked," he whispered, a sense of awe in his voice. It actually worked. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me. We had done it. We had walked into the heart of the nightmare and come out the other side. We left Montenegro that day. At the airport in Podgorica, we embraced. No longer just fellow soldiers, but brothers, bonded for life by the strange, terrifying, and ultimately redemptive journey we had shared. We promised to stay in touch. I flew back to Rome. My apartment, which had become my prison, now felt like a sanctuary. It was just a place again. The corners were no longer cold. The silence was no longer heavy. For the first time, it felt like home. It's been a year since that night on the viaduct. I speak to Stefan regularly. Anya made a full recovery. She left the hospital a week after our trip to the bridge. She's painting again, her canvases now filled with vibrant, joyful colors. They travel. They live. They are free. And me? I am free too. The tapping never came back. The quiet dread that was the background noise of my life has vanished. I even took a train last month. It was a high-speed, modern train from Rome to Florence. I sat by the window, and as we shot through a short tunnel, I felt a brief, reflexive jolt of the old fear. But it passed in a heartbeat. It was just a tunnel, just a dark, empty space. I still think about that night on the bridge. I think about Elena and her lonely, endless vigil. I hope that by quieting the others, we truly did bring her son some measure of peace. I hope her burden is lighter. I think about Dragan, the gruff gatekeeper to the mountain's secrets. Sometimes, I wonder about the locket and the compass, lying somewhere in the deep, dark silt at the bottom of the canyon. I wonder if the mountain is still full, or if its hunger will one day return. Dragan said it has a short attention span, but a long memory. But I can't live my life waiting for a ghost that may never return. The toll has been paid. The debt is settled. The story, for me, is finally over. The train has passed. The silence is a blessing. And for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid of the dark. The peace lasted for 7 years. 7 good years. I rebuilt my life on the foundation of that hard-won silence. I dated, I made new friends, I reconnected with my family. I even found myself on a long-haul bus journey through the American Southwest, a research trip for a book on old Spanish missions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Another journey through a vast, haunted landscape. But this time, the ghosts were not my own. The silence was real. The freedom was absolute. I was on a Greyhound bus, somewhere between Flagstaff and Santa Fe. The landscape outside was a watercolor painting of red rock and pale blue sky, stretching into an infinite horizon. The sun was low, casting long, dramatic shadows. I was leaning my head against the cool glass of the window, half asleep, lulled by the gentle drone of the engine and the monotonous, hypnotic rhythm of the road. I wasn't thinking about Montenegro. I wasn't thinking about trains or tunnels or things that tap in the dark. I was thinking about dinner, about the hotel I'd booked, about the archives I needed to visit the next day. Normal things. My eyes drifted over the landscape. Mesas, sagebrush, the occasional, lonely house. And then I saw him. He was standing by the side of the highway, next to a rusted-out barbed wire fence. A young man in what looked like simple, old-fashioned work clothes. His face was pale. His eyes were dark. He was just standing there, perfectly still, as the bus sped past at 70 miles an hour. He wasn't trying to flag us down. He wasn't threatening. He was just watching us, watching me, and as my window aligned with him for that fleeting second, he raised a hand. Not in a wave, but in a quiet, simple gesture of acknowledgement, of salute. A jolt, cold and electric, shot through me. It wasn't the hot terror of a new threat. It was the icy, dawning dread of an old truth finally understood. It wasn't over. It would never be over. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat. It all became so clear in that instant. The ritual on the bridge. It wasn't an exorcism. It was a transfer. Elena had been the anchor, bound by her grief for her son. But her grief was fading with her age. The connection was weakening. When I took her son's book, the old, failing anchor, and then offered up my own most powerful symbol of guidance and home, I hadn't paid a toll. I had volunteered. I had become the new anchor. The ghosts of the Belgrade Bar Railway hadn't been banished. They had simply been reassigned. They were tethered to me now. The peace I had experienced wasn't freedom. It was the quiet contentment of settled spirits. They were calm because their anchor was stable. I wasn't being haunted. I was the keeper of the haunting. My life was no longer my own. It was a lighthouse, and my only purpose was to shine, to provide a fixed point for a scattered fleet of ghosts so they wouldn't crash against the shores of the living world. The reason I felt peace was because they were at peace, resting in my orbit. The man on the side of the road wasn't a threat. He was a sentinel, confirming my location, acknowledging his warden. I opened my eyes and looked back out the window, but he was long gone, lost to the miles and the fading light. How many others were out there, just at the edge of my perception, standing on street corners in Rome, in the forests of Montenegro, in the deserts of Arizona, all watching me pass, all tethered to me by an invisible, unbreakable chain forged on a dark bridge 7 years ago. The bus drove on, carrying me toward the sunset. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never truly arrive at a destination again. My journey would never end. I was the warden of an unseen prison, and my sentence was for life. The silence I had cherished for so long was not an absence of noise. It was the sound of sleeping monsters. And my greatest, most secret fear was no longer that I would one day hear the tapping again. It was what might happen if it ever stopped. They say every story has an echo, that the sounds and words can attract the attention of something. Can you feel it now? That cold spot on the back of your neck? That's the echo of this story, looking for you. Give this video a like if you felt it, and subscribe if you want to find out what other echoes we can awaken together. Just remember, when you turn off the lights, listen carefully. Sometimes, you can hear more than you were meant to. Sleep well.